Welcome to Sleepy History. I am Hugh, your guide to the quiet corners of the past. If you find rest here, a quiet like and subscribe keeps the candle lit. Tonight, we listen to the story of a peasant working for King Edward I at the legendary Feast of the Swans. Settle in and let's begin. The year is 1306. You're about to wake up in a world where time moves differently, where the sun is your clock and the seasons are your calendar. It's May 22nd, the morning of the Feast of the Swans at Westminster Palace. King Edward himself will knight 300 young men today, and they'll all swear their oaths upon 2 swans adorned with golden nets. But you won't be taking any oaths. You'll be in the kitchens, in the halls, in the shadows, making it all possible. Your eyes flutter open in the grey pre-dawn. The first sensation isn't sight, but smell. That familiar cocktail of damp straw, wood smoke, and something earthier that you've long stopped noticing. Your bed, if you can call it that, is a cloth sack stuffed with whatever straw could be spared from the stables 3 months ago. It rustles beneath you like autumn leaves, and yes, something else rustles too. The fleas, your constant companions. They've been with you so long, they feel like part of your skin's natural rhythm. An itch here, a tickle there. The soft prickle of tiny feet across your forearm. The church bell tolls 4 times. You need to be at Westminster's kitchens before the 5th bell. Your body protests as you shift. 22 summers you've seen, which makes you neither young nor old. Just worn in specific places like a favourite tool. Your spine pops in 3 places as you sit up. The sound echoes in the small space you share with your younger brother, who's still snoring into his own straw-filled corner. And your mother, whose breathing has that wet quality that started last winter and never quite left. The floor beneath your bare feet is packed earth, cold and slightly damp from the spring rains that find their way through the thatch above. Each step leaves a shallow impression that will be worn smooth again by evening. You know every divot, every slope of this floor. In the darkness, you navigate by memory and instinct, your hand finding the rough wooden beam that marks the corner where the water bucket sits. The water is cold enough to make your teeth ache. You splash it on your face, feeling the shock travel down your neck, waking up parts of your mind that would prefer to stay sleeping. Droplets run down into the collar of the tunic you never took off last night. Why would you? It's the only one you own. This shapeless thing of rough brown wool that's been mended so many times it's more thread than original cloth. You pull on your hose, the wool scratchy against your legs, already imagining how they'll feel by day's end, damp with sweat, chafing at the backs of your knees. Your leather shoes, such as they are, wait by the door. The left one has a split starting near the toe that you've been ignoring for weeks. Today, with all the running you'll do at Westminster, that split will probably grow. But that's a problem for tomorrow's version of you. Before you leave, you allow yourself one small breakfast ritual. From a cloth bundle hidden behind a loose stone, you pull out a piece of bread. Not the coarse, gritty bread that tastes of sawdust and survival, but real wheat bread, almost white, that you managed to pocket from the palace kitchens 3 days ago. You've been saving it for today, knowing you'll need strength. It's gone slightly hard, but when you bite into it, the taste of actual wheat, of something that wasn't stretched with ground acorns or peas, fills your mouth with an almost forgotten luxury. The walk to Westminster takes you through streets that are just beginning to wake. Your feet know every stone, every puddle, every place where the mud turns treacherous. The city smells different at this hour. Less human waste, more wood smoke and baking bread from the bakers who've been up since midnight. A few other shadows move through the streets, all heading toward the palace. You recognize some by their gait alone. There's William the spit-turner, his left shoulder permanently higher than his right from years of cranking, and Agnes, who scrubs the great hall floors, her back already bent, though she's barely older than you. Westminster Palace looms ahead, its stone walls dark against the lightning sky. You've been inside those walls hundreds of times, but never through the main gate. Your entrance is around the side, through a small door that leads directly to the kitchens. The guard there knows you, gives you the same disinterested nod he's given you every feast day for the past 2 years. The heat hits you first. The kitchen fires have been burning all night, and the air shimmers with it. Then comes the noise, the clatter of pots, the rhythmic thud of knives on boards, the shouting of the head cook, who seems to believe that volume equals authority. And finally, the smells. Meat roasting, bread baking, spices you can't name mixing in the air like an invisible feast. Your job today is specific and vital. You're one of the feast preparers, but not for the nobles. You prepare the hall itself, the backdrop for their glory. Your hands will polish every inch of silver until it gleams like moonlight. You'll spread fresh rushes mixed with herbs across the floor, lavender, rosemary, and meadowsweet, to mask the smell of 300 young knights who've been wearing the same clothes for days. You'll arrange the trestle tables, ensuring each bench is exactly the right distance from the next, allowing room for swords and swagger. Around you, the kitchen continues its orchestrated chaos. The bakers pull loaves from ovens, their faces red and sweating. The sauce makers stir their mysterious concoctions, tasting and adjusting with the concentration of alchemists. A boy, maybe 10 summers, turns a spit with a whole pig, the fat dripping and sizzling into the fire below. Your fingers work carefully, weaving the golden threads through the net's framework. The repetitive motion is almost meditative. Thread over, thread under, pull tight, but not too tight. The gold feels strange under your fingers, soft but strong, valuable but useless for anything practical. It exists purely for beauty, for show, for this one moment when the king's son and 300 young nobles will place their hands on these swans and swear to recover Scotland or die trying. The morning wears on. The 5th bell has long since rung, then the 6th. Your back aches from hunching over your work. Your stomach, despite the wheat bread, begins its familiar complaint. Around you, the feast takes shape. Subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures, are carried past, depicting scenes of chivalry and conquest. A swan made entirely of marchpane, white as snow, with every feather carved in sweet almond paste. A castle of pastry and sugar, its towers reaching as high as your elbow, its walls decorated with real gold leaf. You're allowed a brief break to use the privy. Even here, in the great palace, it's just a wooden seat over a hole, though admittedly a step up from your bucket at home. The smell is masked somewhat by herbs thrown down the shaft, but there's no disguising what lies beneath. On your way back, you pass through the great hall itself. The transformation is beginning. Tapestries are being hung, their rich reds and blues and golds telling stories of ancient kings and impossible beasts. The high table is being set with plate, real silver plates and goblets that catch the light from the windows. Each piece must be polished until you can see your face in it, though when you catch your reflection in a serving dish, you hardly recognize yourself. Your face is thinner than you remembered, your eyes older. Back in the kitchen, the swans are now roasting, turned slowly by two boys who look ready to collapse from the heat. The smell is incredible, rich and gamey, mixed with the herbs and spices that have been rubbed into the skin. The head cook bastes them with wine and honey, each application making the skin darker, crisper. When they're done, they'll be allowed to cool just enough to handle. Then the golden nets you're weaving will be draped over them, and they'll be carried into the hall on massive silver platters, probably the most magnificent things you'll ever help create. But you won't see that moment. By then, you'll be in the shadows, clearing away the preparation debris, scrubbing the pots, making everything clean for tomorrow's normal meals. You might glimpse the nobility through doorways, their silk clothes that rustle like whispers, their jewels that fracture candlelight into rainbow sparks. You'll hear their laughter, bright and careless, floating over the music of lutes and pipes. The day continues its rhythm. Your fingers are sore from the gold thread, tiny cuts from where the metal edges caught your skin. Around midday, there's a brief meal for the workers. Pottage, of course. That eternal grey stew of grains and vegetables and whatever else found its way into the pot. But today, it's different. There are actual pieces of meat in it, trimmings from the feast preparations. The fat coats your mouth, rich and satisfying, in a way that makes you close your eyes to savour it. You return to your work, now helping to arrange the lower tables where the lesser knights will sit. Each bench must be covered with clean cloth, not the fine white linen of the high table, but decent stuff, worn but presentable. You smooth each wrinkle with your palm, feeling the texture of the weave, the places where it's been mended with slightly different thread. The afternoon light slants through the high windows, catching the dust motes that dance in the air like tiny golden insects. Your mother used to tell you those were fairies, invisible, except when the light caught them just right. You believed her then. Now you know they're just dust, but sometimes, in moments like this, when the light is perfect and your mind is tired, you let yourself believe again, just for a breath or two. The nets are finally finished. You hold them up to the light, these strange, precious things that you've spent hours creating. They're beautiful in a way that has nothing to do with your world. They'll exist for one evening, draped over birds that will be consumed by people who've never wondered where their next meal will come from. Tomorrow, if there's anything left of them, they'll be carefully stored away for the next great feast. Or more likely, the gold thread will be picked out and melted down for some other purpose. The head cook inspects your work, his thick fingers surprisingly gentle as he examines each join, each knot. He nods, which, from him, is high praise, and takes the nets away to the cooling swans. You're dismissed to your next task, spreading fresh rushes in the hall. The rushes arrive in great bundles, still damp with morning dew. You and a dozen others spread them across the floor, working backward from the far wall so you don't walk over your completed work. The herbs mixed in release their scent as you scatter them. A green, clean smell that briefly overcomes the usual palace odours of smoke, sweat, and tallow. As you work, you think about the young men who will kneel on these rushes tonight, their knees pressing into the herbs you're spreading. They'll smell the rosemary and lavender as they swear their oaths. Some of them are barely older than you, born into a world where their biggest worry is which sword to wear, which horse to ride. You don't envy them exactly. Their world comes with its own dangers. Wars to fight, honours to defend, early deaths on distant battlefields. But still, to have a choice in your danger, to meet it mounted and armed, rather than bent over in a field or sweating in a kitchen, that seems like a different kind of life entirely. The sun is lower now, sending long shadows across the hall. Soon, you'll be sent away, back to the kitchens for final preparations, then home before the feast proper begins. You're not meant to see the transformation complete, the moment when all your work becomes the backdrop for their glory, but you know how it will look. You've prepared enough feasts to picture it. The hall will glow with the light of 100 candles. The golden nets on the swans will catch that light and throw it back doubled. The young knights, freshly bathed and dressed in their finest clothes, will enter in procession. The king will speak words about duty and honour and the glory of England. The swans will be presented, and each knight will place his hand on them and swear. The specific words don't matter. They're all variations on the same theme: death before dishonour, victory or the grave. Scotland will submit, or they'll die trying. Then the feast will begin properly. Wine will flow like water. The subtleties will be presented to amazement and applause. Music will fill the air, and later, when everyone is drunk enough, there will be dancing. The rushes you spread will be trampled, the herbs crushed to release their last fragrance. By morning, the hall will smell of wine and vomit and snuffed candles. But that's tomorrow's concern. Now, in this fading afternoon light, you finish spreading the last of the rushes. Your back screams as you stand straight. Your hands are green from the herbs, and the smell of lavender clings to your clothes. It's almost pleasant, this borrowed perfume that will fade by the time you reach home. The head cook appears in the doorway and jerks his head. Your signal to return to the kitchens. There's still work to be done. Vegetables to chop for tomorrow's ordinary meals. Pots to scrub. Floors to sweep. The feast may be the palace's concern tonight. But tomorrow, life returns to its usual rhythm, and that rhythm requires preparation. In the kitchen, the swans are ready. You glimpse them as they're carried past, magnificent and strange, their golden nets sparkling, their roasted bodies still steaming slightly. They look like creatures from a story, something between bird and treasure. For a moment, everyone stops to watch them pass. Even the head cook, who's seen 100 such feasts, pauses in his shouting to observe. Then the moment breaks, and everyone returns to work. You're given a knife and a pile of turnips. Of course it's turnips. It's always turnips. You begin peeling, the rhythm automatic, your hands knowing the motion without your mind's involvement. Peel, turn, peel, turn. The peelings fall into a bucket at your feet. Nothing wasted, they'll go to the pigs, who will eventually go to the table, and the cycle continues. The evening bell rings. Your time is done. You clean your knife, hang it in its proper place, and make your way to the door. Others are leaving too, the army of invisible people who make the visible glory possible. You nod to those you know, too tired for words. The walk home is different in the evening. The streets are busier, but also more dangerous. You keep your head down, your pace steady, but not hurried. To hurry is to look like you have something worth stealing. The mud seems deeper in the fading light, and you feel that split in your shoe finally give way. Cold mud oozes between your toes. Your home is dark when you arrive. Your mother is already asleep, her breathing that same wet rattle. Your brother is out somewhere, probably trying to court that baker's daughter who has no interest in him. You don't light a candle, they're too precious. Instead, you navigate by touch and memory to your corner. You lie down on your straw mattress, still wearing your muddy shoes, because taking them off requires energy you don't have. The straw rustles its familiar greeting. The fleas begin their evening exploration. Through the thin walls, you hear your neighbours, someone arguing, a baby crying, the rhythmic thump of something you don't want to identify. But as you close your eyes, you don't see your dark corner. You see golden nets catching candlelight. You see great halls transformed by rushes and herbs. You see swans that were birds become something else, something symbolic, something that 300 young men will remember for the rest of their lives, whether those lives are long or short. You were part of that, even if no one will ever know it. Your hands wove those golden nets. Your back ached spreading those rushes. Your labor made their moment possible. And tomorrow you'll wake before dawn and do it all again. Not for glory or oath-making, but for the simple, profound reason that this is your life, and you're still living it. The church bell tolls the late hour. Somewhere in Westminster Palace, the feast is reaching its peak. Wine is flowing, music is playing, oaths are being sworn. But here, in your corner, with your body aching and your stomach only half full, you're already drifting towards sleep. And in your dreams, you're not a servant or a peasant or an invisible pair of hands. You're something else, something between. You're the person who makes the world work while others make history. You're the one who knows that real life isn't about swans and gold thread, but about surviving another day, finding bread that isn't stretched with sawdust, keeping the rain from coming through the thatch. The morning will come soon enough with its bells and its demands. But for now, in this quiet darkness, you can rest. The fleas are just part of the landscape of your skin. The straw is almost comfortable if you don't move too much. And somewhere, faint as a memory, you can still smell lavender on your clothes. Let that scent carry you deeper into sleep. Let the sounds of the night, the arguments, the crying, the endless human noise of people living too close together become a kind of lullaby. You've earned this rest. You've worked from bell to bell, from dark to dark. And tomorrow you'll do it again, because that's what it means to live in this world, in this time, in this body that's yours for however many years you're granted. The feast of the swans will be remembered in chronicles and songs. The knights who swore their oaths tonight will have their names recorded, their deeds celebrated or mourned. But you who wove the golden nets, who spread the rushes, who made the moment possible, you'll be forgotten by history. And maybe that's all right. Maybe there's a different kind of immortality in the endless repetition of necessary work, in the knowledge that someone, always someone, must peel the turnips and spread the rushes and weave the golden nets. Your name won't be remembered, but your labor is eternal. Someone did it before you. Someone will do it after you. It's a kind of continuity that doesn't need chronicles or songs. Sleep now. Let your tired body sink into the straw. Let your mind release the day's labors. Tomorrow will come with its own demands, its own small victories and defeats. But tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that you played your part, invisible but essential in something larger than yourself. The church bell tolls midnight. The feast continues at Westminster, but you don't hear it anymore. You're deep in dreams now, in that place where peasants and princes are equally vulnerable, equally human. Your breathing steadies, matching the rhythm of your mother's labored breath, your absent brother's empty corner, waiting for his return. This is your life. Not glorious, not easy, not particularly notable, but yours. Completely and utterly yours. And in a world where so little belongs to you, that possession of your own existence, your own continuing despite everything, is its own quiet victory. Sleep well, you who history will forget. Sleep well, you who made the feast possible. Sleep well and dream of golden nets and lavender, of wheat bread and warm pottage with actual meat. Dream of a world where your labor is seen, where your exhaustion is honored, where your invisible hands are finally acknowledged. But even if that world never comes, even if you wake tomorrow to the same bells and the same turnips and the same endless work, you'll continue, because that's what you do. That's what your people have always done. You endure, you persist, you make the world work while others make history. And in that persistence, in that daily returning to the necessary labor, there's a kind of heroism that needs no swans, no oaths, no golden thread. Just you, getting up each morning despite everything, and doing what needs to be done. The night deepens, your breathing slows, the sounds of the city fade to a distant murmur, and somewhere, so faint it might be imagination, you can still smell lavender. The night of May 22nd, 1306 was not yet over. In the great hall of the Palace of Westminster, the darkness was a physical presence, a cold, heavy blanket that filled the cavernous space from the stone-flagged floor to the distant, unseen, timbered ceiling. This was a place built for noise, for ceremony, for the boisterous life of a royal court. But in these final hours before dawn, it was a tomb of silence. The only light came from high, arched windows, where a sliver of moon cast a milky, ethereal glow across the vast emptiness. The light did not illuminate. It merely sketched the hall in shades of grey, revealing the ghostly outlines of mighty pillars and the faint sheen of weapons and coats of arms hanging on the walls. The air itself was a tapestry of faint, lingering scents. There was the foundational smell of ancient stone and old wood, the memory of 1,000 fires that had burned in the central hearth. Woven into this was the faint, waxy perfume of beeswax from countless candles, and the dry, sweet fragrance of the herbs, lavender, chamomile, and mint, that had been scattered among the rushes covering the floor days ago. It was a clean smell, a smell of order and readiness, but it was thin and cold, a fragile defense against the damp chill that seeped from the very stones of the palace. This profound stillness was not emptiness. It was a held breath, a moment of profound potential energy before the kinetic chaos of the day to come. For this was not just any day. This was Whit Sunday, the day King Edward I would knight his son, the Prince of Wales, along with nearly 300 other young men, in a ceremony of unprecedented scale. It was the day of the Feast of the Swans, a political and chivalric spectacle designed to bind an army to the king's will for his final, brutal war in Scotland. The entire palace was a machine being wound tight, and in the darkness, the very first gears were beginning to turn. The first movement was not in the hall itself, but deep within the palace's arteries, in the cramped, windowless spaces where the engine of the household slept. In a small, cold room tucked away in the cellars, a young woman stirred. We will call her Alice, for her story is the story of countless anonymous servants who kept the world of lords and ladies turning. She was a scullery maid, the lowest of the low in the kitchen hierarchy. Her bed was a simple straw mattress on the floor, a space she shared with several other female servants. The room was cold and damp, the straw providing little comfort against the hardness of the floor, but the shared body heat of the sleepers offered a small measure of warmth. There was no bell to wake her, no gentle rousing. A lifetime of habit, of a body attuned to the rhythms of service, was her only clock. She rose in the near total darkness, her movements practiced and silent, careful not to disturb the others. She dressed quickly, her clothes simple, coarse, and functional. At the same time, in a similar attic space, another young housemaid was doing the same, preparing to face her own list of thankless tasks. Their day, and therefore the day of the entire palace, had begun. Their labour was the foundation upon which the entire spectacle of power would be built, yet its most crucial moments would take place in darkness and silence, long before the nobility even dreamed of waking. Their work was designed to be invisible, its success measured by the seamless comfort it provided to those who would never know the effort it required. Alice's first destination was the scullery, a damp, stone-walled room adjacent to the main kitchens. Her first task was elemental: fire. The hearth was cold, filled with the grey ashes and soot of yesterday's fires. With methodical, practiced movements, she cleaned it out, her hands already grimy in the frigid air. Using tinder, flint, and steel, she coaxed a tiny spark into a flame, feeding it with kindling until a small but steady fire was established. This fire was the heart of her world, the source of the hot water that would be her primary tool and torment for the next 18 hours. At the same time, the housemaid was in the great hall, tending to the massive central hearth there, ensuring it would be ready to warm the nobles when they eventually gathered. Once the fires were lit, the second great elemental task began: the tyranny of water. Water did not flow from a tap. It was a finite, heavy resource that had to be physically conquered and moved. Bucket by heavy wooden bucket, the maids and the lowest-ranking boys hauled water from the palace well or a nearby tributary of the Thames. The journey was cold, the buckets heavy, the ground uneven. Each trip was a grueling expenditure of energy, not for a primary task, but merely to acquire the raw materials for one. The sheer volume of water needed for a day like this, for cooking, for endless washing, for cleaning, was staggering. This logistical burden, this constant battle with weight and distance, was the hidden tax on a servant's endurance, the unseen labour that made all other labour possible. As the first pale hints of grey began to lighten the eastern sky, the fires were burning and the first cauldrons of water were beginning to heat. The palace was still quiet, but its heart had begun to beat. The pre-dawn work of Alice and her fellow low-ranking servants was not chaotic. It was the first humble step in a vast and rigidly structured operation. A great royal household like that at Westminster was not merely a home. It was a self-contained world, a microcosm of the feudal kingdom it served, with a complex hierarchy of power and responsibility that governed every aspect of daily life. To understand the day of the feast, one must first understand the intricate human machinery designed to execute it. At the apex of this domestic world, acting as the king's administrative right hand, was the steward or seneschal. This was a position of immense power and trust, often held by a knight. The steward was the general manager of the entire estate. He did not concern himself with the lighting of fires or the hauling of water, but with the grander logistics of the household. He kept meticulous accounts of income and expenditures, tracking the rents from tenants, the taxes collected, and the fines paid to the castle's law courts. He oversaw the local court, the hall moat, ensuring the king's law was applied in all but the most serious of crimes. The steward was expected to be prudent and faithful and profitable, with a deep knowledge of the law of the realm, capable of protecting his lord's interests and advising the bailiffs and other officials beneath him. Such was the complexity of the role that by the early 14th century, training colleges, such as the one at Oxford, had emerged to teach aspiring stewards the necessary skills in accounting, law, and letter writing over a course of 6 to 12 months. On the day of the feast, the steward would be the master of ceremonies, the silent conductor ensuring that every part of the grand orchestra of service played its part in perfect time. Working in concert with the steward were other key officials. The marshals supervised the stables, the horses, and the men-at-arms, a critical role in a military household, especially on a day when hundreds of knights would be present. The castle chaplain, an educated man fluent in Latin or French, presided over religious services, but also served as the Lord's personal secretary, writing official correspondence and affixing the royal seal. Attached to the chaplain's staff was the almoner, a figure whose role would become crucial after the feast, tasked with distributing leftover food and other alms to the poor. Nowhere was this hierarchy more evident or more essential than in the kitchens, the furnace at the heart of the palace. The kitchen staff of a great noble or royal court could number in the hundreds, a specialized army dedicated to the art and science of feeding the household. This army was commanded by the head cook, a figure of great importance and respect. A skilled royal cook was a valuable asset, often considered part of the aristocracy, and paid a handsome wage for his expertise. He was not just a chef, but a manager, responsible for planning menus, purchasing ingredients, and overseeing the preservation of food in the castle's pantries and larders. He would be familiar with the great cookbooks of the age, such as the Liber de Coquina, and capable of creating the elaborate dishes required to impress the king's guests. Beneath the head cook was a legion of specialists, each with a specific domain. The pantler was the master of the pantry, responsible for bread and its associated accoutrements. The butler, a title derived from the old French bouteiller, or bottle bearer, was in charge of the buttery, managing the vast cellars of wine and ale and overseeing its service. There were dedicated butchers to break down carcasses, poulterers for fowl, and wafer makers for delicate pastries. A saucier specialized in the complex, heavily spiced sauces that were a hallmark of medieval elite cuisine, and a larderer managed the larder where preserved meats were stored. These skilled craftsmen were supported by a host of undercooks and assistants, often their own children serving as apprentices. And at the very bottom of this bustling, hierarchical world was the infantry, the scullions, the kitchen maids, and the spit boys. These were the individuals, like Alice, who performed the most physically demanding and menial tasks. They washed and scrubbed, fetched and carried, plucked fowl, scaled fish, and turned the heavy spits before the roaring fires for hours on end. Their work was relentless, hot, and dirty, the unseen foundation of the culinary masterpieces that would emerge from the kitchen. This rigid structure, from the powerful steward to the lowly spit boy, was the logic of the medieval household. It was a system designed for efficiency and control, ensuring that an event of the magnitude of the Feast of the Swans could be executed with a precision that belied the immense human effort required. Each person knew their place and their task, a cog in a great machine preparing to produce a spectacle of royal power. As the morning progressed, the cold, silent hall of the pre-dawn hours underwent a profound metamorphosis. The quiet, methodical work of the junior servants gave way to a more organized and purposeful bustle as the entire household staff converged to prepare the stage for the day's main event. The great hall, the architectural and social heart of the palace, was being transformed from an empty vessel into a dazzling theatre of wealth and power. The first and most fundamental change was the arrival of the tables. In a multifunctional space like the Great Hall, which served as a court and reception area as well as a dining room, permanent furniture was a rarity. Instead, long, heavy boards were brought in and set upon sturdy trestles, arranged in neat rows running the length of the hall. This was heavy work, requiring teams of servants to maneuver the cumbersome planks into place. Once assembled, the tables were draped with fine linen cloths, their stark whiteness a brilliant contrast to the dark wood and stone of the hall. On some occasions, for the most important guests, these cloths might even be of silk, a testament to the host's immense wealth. With the tables set, the display of plate began. This was a crucial part of the performance of status. Servants, under the watchful eye of the butler, began to lay out the tableware. For the majority of the guests, this meant platters and cups of pewter, polished to a high sheen. But at the high table, a raised platform at the far end of the hall, where the king and his most honoured guests would sit, the display was far more magnificent. Here, silver dishes, cups, and ewers glistened in the growing light from the high windows, and the flickering torches being lit along the walls. The most important object on the table was the great saltcellar. Salt was an expensive and vital commodity, used extensively in food preservation, and the vessel that held it was a primary symbol of the host's status. These were often elaborate, sculptural pieces of silver or gold, sometimes fashioned into the shape of a castle, a ship, or a favourite animal, placed with reverence before the Lord's seat. Each place was marked not with a plate as we would know it, but with a trencher, a thick, square slice of day-old bread that would serve as an absorbent base for the meat and sauces to come. The floor, too, received its final preparations. The layer of rushes, a type of marsh grass, was an essential feature of the medieval hall. It provided insulation from the cold stone, absorbed spills, and, when mixed with fragrant herbs, helped to freshen the air and deter pests. For this grand occasion, a fresh, thick layer of rushes had been laid, and servants now moved through the hall, sprinkling them liberally with handfuls of lavender, chamomile, rose petals, and mint. As people moved about, their feet would crush the herbs, releasing a pleasant, clean scent that would, for a time, mask the other, less savoury odours of a crowded hall. By late morning, the preparations were complete. The hall stood ready, a symphony of sensory details designed to impress and overwhelm. The sight of the long, white-clad tables, the gleam of polished silver, the scent of fresh herbs, and the growing warmth from the now roaring central hearth all combined to create an atmosphere of opulent anticipation. The ceremony began not with food, but with a ritual of purification that was as much about social distinction as it was about cleanliness. As the guests arrived, the king, the prince, the great earls, and the nearly 300 young men about to be knighted, they were met by servants bearing basins, ewers, and napkins. The ewers, often made of silver, were filled with warm water, sometimes perfumed with rose water or other aromatics. Each guest, before taking their place, would wash their hands. This act was a crucial piece of etiquette in an age where most people, regardless of rank, ate with their fingers. However, the ritual served a deeper purpose. In a world where true sanitation was an impossibility, where dogs would soon be roaming under the tables and bones would be tossed to the floor, this public washing was a performance of refinement. It was a symbolic gesture that separated the civilized space of the high table from the more chaotic world outside, and distinguished the noble guest worthy of such service from the common masses. The servants providing the perfumed water were not merely facilitating hygiene, They were stagehands in a carefully choreographed play of social hierarchy. Once hands were washed, the complex process of seating began, a physical manifestation of the feudal order. The Lord, in this case King Edward I, and his most important guests, including his son, the Prince of Wales, and high-ranking church dignitaries, took their places at the high table on its raised dais. This position afforded them the best view, the most warmth from the fire, and a symbolic elevation above all others. The rest of the guests, a vast assembly of nobles and new knights, were seated at the long trestle tables below, their proximity to the high table determined by their precise rank and status. The furthest from the king were the lowliest. With a prayer of grace from the chaplain, the spectacle was ready to begin. The great hall was no longer just a room. It was a living diagram of the medieval social universe, perfectly ordered and awaiting the chaos of the feast. With the guests seated and grace said, a blast of trumpets echoed through the high-ceilinged hall, signaling the start of the feast and silencing the low hum of conversation. The sound was the starting gun for an assault on the senses, a carefully orchestrated performance of overwhelming abundance that would last for hours. The hall, once ordered and expectant, was now filled with a rising tide of noise, heat, and activity. The din was immense. Hundreds of men, fresh from the solemnity of the knighting ceremony in Westminster Abbey, an event so crowded that 2 knights were reportedly crushed to death, were now free to celebrate. Their voices, raised in conversation and laughter, merged into a constant, reverberating roar that filled the vast space. Adding to this was the continuous music provided by a multitude of minstrels. Harps, lutes, pipes, and drums created a festive and loud soundtrack to the proceedings, their melodies often struggling to be heard over the clamour of the diners. The heat, too, became a palpable presence. The great central hearth radiated warmth, but this was amplified by the hundreds of bodies packed into the hall, and the light from countless wax torches and candles that lined the walls, their flames dancing and casting a smoky, flickering glow over the scene. For the servants, this was the moment of truth. From the kitchens poured a river of dishes, young squires and liveried staff moving with practiced precision, arms loaded with platters. Quantity was the message, variety the boast. Whole joints of pork, beef, mutton, and venison came to table for carving. Ranks of birds, chickens, geese, ducks, pheasants, partridges followed. Fish appeared fresh or salted or tucked into pies to satisfy both appetite and the church. At the high table, the rarities, rice and almonds, figs and dates, all freighted with expensive spices and sharp, mustarded sauces for the bold medieval palate. Etiquette kept the spectacle orderly. Diners shared trenchers and cups. The lesser served the greater, cutting meat, breaking bread, passing drink. Knives did the slicing. Fingers of courtesy did the rest. A small pantomime of civility amid abundance. All of it was politics. Edward had already lavished armour, embroidered robes, even beds on the new knights. The feast completed that weaponized generosity, binding loyalty with hospitality. Every platter and cup was an instrument, obligating guests as surely as any charter. Then the purpose revealed itself. A path opened, and 2 feathered swans, netted in gold, were borne in. Edward I, old and ailing, rose and swore before God and the swans to avenge John Comyn's murder at Dumfries and to subdue Scotland. When done, he vowed to take up the cross and shed no more Christian blood. The prince followed, promising not to sleep twice in the same place until he reached Scotland. Nearly 300 new knights echoed them. The pageant of food and chivalry had forged a weapon of war. When the last noble withdrew, the hall fell into a heavy silence. Herbs and beeswax gave way to the stale thickness of wine, fat, and smoke. The floor was treacherous. Greasy trenchers collapsed to paste. Pools of ale soaked into rushes, bones strewn for dogs. The undoing began. Night work here was ritual. Reverse the chaos. Restore the stage. Tables were stripped, boards lifted from trestles, the room's shape returning by degrees. The almoner arrived, sorting leavings with professional piety. Good bread, unspoiled meats, and whole pies went into baskets for morning alms. A Christian duty and a public performance. Lesser scraps fed dogs or the pit. Even the debris was braided back into the social order. With boards stacked and alms dispatched, the floor stood exposed. The morning's green had become a matted, sour quilt. Housemaids with brooms and shovels waded in. This was not dusting a parlour, but mucking a stall, shoveling out damp, stinking rushes by the basketful, trip after trip. In smaller chambers, woven mats might be lifted and beaten. In a great hall, and for a night like this, loose rushes were likely strewn and afterward replaced wholesale. Erasmus, writing later, mocked floors where old rushes lingered obscenely. Westminster would have been cleaner, but the principle holds. Beneath, stone showed stained and slick. Sand and hot water cut the grease. Then came fresh rushes, armful by armful, and a last scattering of lavender, mint, chamomile. The foulness thinned to meadow air. Benches were wiped and stored, the hearth laid anew. By dawn, the hall was reborn, imposing, empty, and innocent of how it was made so. Below stairs, the scullery raged like a steamhouse. In that low room of stone and clatter, Alice and the others confronted mountains of pewter, wood, and iron. Sand scoured, rushes scraped, and cauldrons of water rolled and spat. Their chief ally was lye soap, wood ash, leached into potash and boiled with tallow until fat and alkali married into a caustic jelly. It cut grease and flayed hands. Arms ached, backs burned, feet numbed on wet stone. The work was monotonous and merciless, turning ash and fat into cleanliness, filth into order, alchemy by labour. Elsewhere, laundresses tackled the great wash, boiling lye and linens in vast tubs, beating cloth with paddles, rinsing, wringing, and spreading it to dry and bleach. After a feast of this scale, that work ran for days. White tablecloths were not magic, they were muscle. By sunrise, the measure of success was invisibility. The king would descend to warmth, fragrance, and order as if effortless. The effort itself would already be swallowed by the next round of chores. Alice's hands were red and raw, the housemaids' backs in knots, but the day did not pause to thank them. Beyond the hall, last night's vows began to move history. Edward I would ride north for one more campaign and die in 1307, the cross vow unfulfilled. His son, Edward II, would reign badly, taste disaster at Bannockburn in 1314, and sink into factional strife. Among the men knighted that night stood Piers Gaveston, whose favour stoked baronial rage and ended at a scaffold in 1312, and Roger Mortimer, who would, with Queen Isabella, unmake the king himself. Great fates turned on oaths sworn over swans. From the floor, the story reads differently. Power is theatre. Labour builds the stage, lights the candles, and scrubs away the stains. The longest night below was only the prelude to a long, dark chapter above. History remembers the vows. The world runs on the hands that washed the cups.